Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes, but he'd never seen a contestant arrive with an IV pole. The 16-year-old boy wheeled it beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world, the clear plastic tubing snaking up to where it disappeared beneath his oversized Lakers jersey. Tommy Chen moved slowly across the Family Feud stage, his family hovering protectively around him, and when Steve looked into his eyes, he saw something that made him forget every joke he'd prepared. It was a Tuesday afternoon at the Atlanta studios, and the energy was different from the moment the Chen family walked through the doors. Usually, families arrive buzzing with excitement, practicing their answers, taking selfies with the iconic logo. The Chens were quieter, more deliberate, like they were carrying something precious that might break if they moved too fast. Tommy's father, David, kept one hand on his son's shoulder. His mother, Linda, carried a small medical bag. His younger sister, Grace, held Tommy's free hand, the one not gripping the IV pole. And Tommy himself moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to navigate the world differently than other teenagers. The Make-A-Wish Foundation had arranged everything. For 6 months, while Tommy underwent treatment at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, his one request had been simple. He didn't want to meet celebrities or go to Disney World. He wanted to be on Family Feud with his family. He wanted to feel normal for just one afternoon. Steve had been briefed, of course. The producers had explained the situation carefully, sensitively. But briefings were just words on paper. Standing there watching this slight teenager maneuver his medical equipment with practiced ease, Steve realized no amount of preparation could have readied him for this moment. "Well, look here," Steve said, walking over during the family introductions, his voice carrying its usual warmth, but something softer underneath. "We got the Chen family all the way from Philadelphia. How you doing, young man?" Tommy looked up with eyes that seemed too old for his 16-year-old face. But when he smiled, something magical happened. For just a moment, the medical equipment disappeared. The careful movements vanished. He was just a kid excited to be on his favorite game show. "I'm good, Mr. Harvey," Tommy said, his voice slightly hoarse but steady. "I've been watching Family Feud since I was little. My whole family watches together every night." Steve knelt down to Tommy's level, and something in his expression shifted. This wasn't the performer anymore. This was Steve Harvey, the father, recognizing something profound in this moment. "Every night, huh?" Steve asked. "Well then, you must know all the answers." Tommy grinned. "I hope so. We've been practicing." The Chen family was playing against the Rodriguez family from Texas, but from the moment the game began, it was clear this was about more than competition. The Rodriguez family, sensing the weight of the moment, played with unusual gentleness. When Tommy buzzed in first during the face-off, the entire studio erupted in applause that felt different from the usual game show energy. It felt like love. The question was innocent enough. Name something that makes you feel happy. Tommy stepped up to the podium, his IV pole beside him, and without hesitation said, "Being with my family." Survey said, "Number one answer." Steve's smile faltered for just a moment. Something in the simplicity of that answer, the way Tommy said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, hit him harder than he expected. Because most teenagers would say video games or friends or money. But Tommy had said family, like he understood something about time and love that most people twice his age never figured out. The game continued, and Tommy surprised everyone. His answers were sharp, thoughtful, often landing in the top spots on the board. His family rallied around him, celebrating each point like it was a victory for more than just their team. And Steve found himself watching Tommy more than managing the game, fascinated by the quiet strength radiating from this young man who moved through the world carrying medical equipment like it was just another part of life. But everything changed during the fourth round. The category was things you'd dream about doing someday. It was Tommy's turn at the podium. He stepped forward carefully, positioning his IV pole, and looked at Steve with those two wise eyes. Steve read the question with his usual enthusiasm. "Name something you dream about doing someday." Tommy paused. Not the usual game show pause while contestants thought through their answers. This was different, deeper. Like he was accessing something that hurt. The studio waited. Steve waited. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. When Tommy finally spoke, his voice was so quiet. Steve had to strain to hear him. Just having a normal day. The words hung in the air like a prayer. The studio audience didn't react immediately because they weren't sure they'd heard correctly. But Steve had heard every word. And something about the way Tommy said it, the longing buried in those 5 simple words, stopped Steve cold. Just having a normal day, Steve repeated softly, and suddenly everyone in the studio understood what they'd just witnessed. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Steve set down his cards. Not placed them on his podium. Dropped them. They scattered across the studio floor as he walked away from his mark and approached Tommy at the family podium. "Stop the music," Steve called out, his voice carrying a new authority. "Stop everything." The familiar Family Feud theme cut out abruptly. The audience fell silent. Even the crew members stopped their usual background movements. Steve reached Tommy and did something unprecedented in his decades of hosting. He knelt down in front of the teenager, his expensive suit touching the studio floor. "Tommy," Steve said, his voice stripped of all performance. "Talk to me, son. What does a normal day look like to you?" Tommy's family started to step forward, protective instincts kicking in. But Steve held up a gentle hand. This was between him and Tommy now. Tommy looked around the studio at all the faces turned toward him. At the cameras still rolling. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than before, like Steve's attention had given him permission to be completely honest. "A normal day is when I wake up and don't have to count pills before breakfast," Tommy said. "It's when my mom asks me what I want to do instead of how I'm feeling. It's when my sister argues with me about stupid stuff because she's not worried about making me sad. It's when my dad talks about next year like it's definitely going to happen." The silence in the studio was absolute. 300 people collectively held their breath as this 16-year-old boy painted a picture of the life he was fighting to get back to. Steve's eyes filled with tears. In 40 years of television, through every crazy answer and unexpected moment, he had never felt his composure crack like this. "Tommy," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "how long has it been since you had a normal day?" 8 months, Tommy replied, without hesitation. 8 months since the diagnosis. 8 months since everything changed. That's when Steve Harvey did something that broke every rule of television production. He stood up, removed his suit jacket, and wrapped it around Tommy's thin shoulders. The jacket was huge on the teenager's slight frame, but Tommy pulled it tight around himself like it was armor. "You know what, Tommy?" Steve said loud enough for the entire studio to hear. "Today is going to be your normal day. Right here, right now." He turned to address everyone in the studio. The Rodriguez family, the Chen family, the audience, the crew. "This young man just taught us something," Steve announced. "He taught us that normal isn't something we should take for granted. Normal is a gift. And today we're all going to help Tommy have the most normal day he's had in 8 months." Steve walked back to his podium. But instead of picking up his cards, he looked directly at Tommy. "You know what happens on normal days?" Steve asked. "Normal teenagers get to boss adults around. Normal teenagers get to make the rules. So here's what we're going to do, Tommy. You're going to be the host for the rest of this show. You're going to ask the questions. You're going to reveal the answers. And we're all going to do exactly what you say." The audience erupted. But it wasn't typical game show applause. It was something deeper, something that came from witnessing a moment when entertainment became ministry. Steve handed Tommy his microphone. The teenager took it with trembling hands, looking at it like it contained magic. "I don't know how to host a game show," Tommy said into the microphone, and his voice carried clearly across the studio. "Normal teenagers don't know how to do lots of things," Steve replied with a grin. "They just figure it out as they go. That's what makes it normal." What happened next was pure magic. Tommy, still wearing Steve's oversized jacket, began asking questions. Not the survey questions on the cards, but questions he made up on the spot. Questions that came from the hurt of a 16-year-old who understood that time was precious. "Rodriguez family," Tommy called out, his confidence growing with each word. "Name something that makes you grateful." "Chen family, name something you do when you're scared that makes you feel better." Everyone in the audience, Name something you wish you could tell someone you love. And incredibly, beautifully, everyone played along. The families called out answers that weren't on any board but mattered more than points. The audience shouted responses that came from their hearts instead of their heads. Steve stood to the side, watching this teenager transform a game show into something sacred. During one of Tommy's made-up questions, something extraordinary happened. He had asked, "Name something that's better when you share it with people you love," and Tommy's sister Grace had answered, "Everything." Tommy looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since he'd walked onto that stage, he wasn't a cancer patient, or a Make-A-Wish kid, or a brave teenager fighting a terrible disease. He was just a big brother, annoyed by his little sister's sappy answer. "Everything," he said into the microphone. "Come on, Grace, that's such a girl answer." Grace stuck her tongue out at him. Tommy rolled his eyes dramatically. Their parents laughed, and suddenly, there it was. Normal. Beautifully. Perfectly normal. The studio audience didn't just applaud this moment. They celebrated it, because they understood they were witnessing something rare. A family being exactly who they were when nobody was watching. But Steve wasn't done. As Tommy continued his impromptu hosting, reveling in his temporary power, Steve quietly worked behind the scenes. He spoke to producers, made phone calls, pulled strings that most people didn't even know existed. When Tommy finally handed the microphone back to Steve, having exhausted his questions and his strength, Steve had one more surprise. "Tommy," he said, "I need to tell you something. You said you dream about having normal days. Well, I just got off the phone with some people, and we're going to make sure you have a lot more of them." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, but it wasn't his usual card. This one was different. "This card has the direct number for the best pediatric oncologist in the country," Steve said. "A man who owes me a favor. He's expecting your call, and he's going to make sure you get the treatment you need to have all the normal days you want." Tommy's parents began to cry. Not the sad tears they'd been holding back for months, but tears of hope. Because sometimes miracles arrive disguised as game show hosts who care enough to make phone calls. But Steve still wasn't finished. "The jacket you're wearing," he told Tommy, "that's yours now. And I want you to wear it to every doctor's appointment, every treatment, every difficult day. Because that jacket has been with me through thousands of moments when people needed hope. Now it's going to be with you." 6 months later, Tommy Chen walked across his high school graduation stage, wearing Steve Harvey's suit jacket. The cancer was in remission. The IV pole was gone. And when he gave his valedictorian speech, he talked about the day when a game show host taught him that normal was something worth fighting for. Steve Harvey received a graduation announcement in the mail, with a photo of Tommy in his jacket, and a note that said simply, "Had a normal day today. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." The episode, when it aired, became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. Not because of the game or the prizes, but because viewers recognized something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. They witnessed the moment when entertainment stopped being about points on a board and became about the points that matter. Compassion, hope, and the revolutionary act of treating someone exactly like they want to be treated. Steve still keeps that graduation photo on his desk, and every year on the anniversary of Tommy's episode, he receives a text message. Still having normal days, still wearing the jacket, still great. Because that's what happens when a 16-year-old teaches a stadium full of adults what normal really means. That's what happens when a game show host remembers that some moments are bigger than television. And that's what happens when everyone in a room decides that making one person feel normal is more important than anything else they could possibly be doing. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is help someone feel perfectly, beautifully ordinary.